So I want to finish this part of the presentation. I want to talk about where some of the technologies that are going to play a role in OTT and how efficiency and lower costs are going to be important in OTT services. And one of the first areas that I want to talk about is where we went from MPEG-2 to H.264 and to the next generation, which is the H.265, which are all going to be sending the same amount of quality but with much less bandwidth and much less storage. If we look at the amount of information that's sent, and we're going to use H.265 as our compression codec, and I'll talk about H.265 in a moment, we're looking at equivalent quality of 4K video would be 22 megabits per second. The equivalent quality of that video, if it's sent in HD, would take 5.6 megabits per second. If we were to send that in standard definition, it would be 1.6 megabits per second. So you can see the tremendous amount of data that HD takes up, and even more data that 4K is going to take up. And these are things that we need to juggle when we're offering OTT services to clients. I introduced you to 4K, and here is a frame size perspective, and this would be PAL, the European PAL standards. HD is 1920 by 1080. We used to call HD a progressive scan as 1080p. Now we're looking at 4K ultra high definition progressive scan as 2160p. You'll be hearing more and more the 2160p term as we move forward. H.265 is promising a 50% improvement in bandwidth and storage at the same quality as H.264. H.264, for example, is used in Blu-ray discs, whereas MPEG-2 was used in DVDs. The trade-off is that it will take 10 times longer to encode a movie using H.265 than H.264. Okay, so from an OTT provider perspective, encoding and transcoding is going to be an important consideration. That once we've encoded it, of course, we can convert our entire library and we'll use half the storage, which is going to be great, and we'll use half the bandwidth, which is going to be also saving quite a bit of money. But at the moment, the encoding times are going to be much higher. Now, the nice thing is that the decoding side at the consumer is going to take 2 to 3 times more processing power. So it needs 10 times more processing power at the encoding, but only 2 to 3 times processing power at the decoding, which is good so that because of the consumer electronics chips that are going to do the decoding in your home aren't going to be requiring as much power at that side. So if we look at, let's say, a time frame of 1 hour to encode H.264, then it's going to take 10 hours to encode using H.265. It's not finishing there, because if we're starting to consider 4K, that's going to take 4 times longer for H.264, but it's going to take 40 times longer for H.265. The other thing to consider is that this 8-bit depth of color is going to be sufficient for what we have in Blu-ray. The consideration for 4K will be probably using 10 bits of depth, and that's going to take even longer to encode. So the amount of processing is going to be significant. And that's a consideration from an OTT perspective, because if we're using an OTT service to re-encode everything in terms of H.265, of course we're going to be saving on bandwidth and everything into the future, but there's going to be a burden in terms of upfront investment to get everything to that format. The other thing to consider, and these things are just happening as we speak, in terms of when we'll be seeing 4K technology at the consumer level. And there's a lot of considerations in terms of the bottleneck of the internet speeds, the processing power on the set-top box or the gaming console that's going to be decoding, the need for HDMI 2.0, for example, that's going to support 60 Hertz at 4K. Then the televisions themselves at 4K also supporting this interface. And we're still in the middle of developing these chipsets in order to make sure these bottlenecks are not occurring along that line. And the transition really is in 2014, because the H.265 codec was finalized last year. So now all these chipsets are being made as we speak. For users that consider that 4K is not going to be happening for a long time, I present an idea of the development curve of various other types of technologies, such as the VHS in the 80s, that reached 70% penetration, the CD that also rose to plateauing in terms of penetration, then the DVD and high definition televisions. All of these technologies are happening faster than the previous one. So a lot of studies are talking about how 4K is actually, because it's already been introduced 2 years ago, is going to be reaching a nice penetration curve by the end of this decade. The other evolution in terms of OTT is in what we call content discovery. It's really about bringing together viewing statistics, social media aspect to type of content that you liked and type of content that you watched and what your friends liked. Also, your buying behavior is a consideration. All these components are brought in to these recommendation engines in order to enhance our viewing of entertainment. This is a revenue generator for OTT providers. It's not just an application. The more people see a meaningful and personal engagement of the recommendation engine, the more content they're viewing, the more they're spending money on that platform. We can look at it from this perspective of internet video recommendations. This was a study from Ericsson, and the top most useful recommendation came from advice of friends and family. So that is the social networking aspect that kind of plays a role here. Also, recommendations based on past viewing was the second most. Looking at the latest releases or user ratings leading the top 4. And what's astonishing is the least most useful is expert recommendations. If you're familiar with IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes, the difference between the two services is that Rotten Tomatoes not only has the user recommendations, but also consolidates all of the top critics and their recommendations for that same movie. And you can compare the two. So in some cases, you'll see 30,000 people gave the rating of the movie 76%, but the critics gave the movie 24%. But I think that talks about the importance of social networking integrated into an OTT platform. What I'm trying to communicate in this slide is that we need to look at OTT as an infrastructure. So if we look at OTT from electricity, then you have the generation of that electricity at the front end. Then you have the delivery of that electricity to your consumers. The consumers consume that electricity through light and switches. You cannot do much with a light switch and a light bulb until you've delivered that electricity and it's generated somewhere in the front end. So the same analogy applies to OTT. At the front end, we have the platform, which is storing that video, which has encoded that video, which is managing the metadata of that video and so on, and it's sitting in a cloud. Then we have the delivery of that video over a content delivery network or the internet, same way that we're delivering electricity over the power grid. And then we're consuming that video on multiple screens, whether it's TV, computers, or mobile devices, in the same way that we're consuming electricity through switches and light bulbs. And everything from that end-to-end aspect of that infrastructure is OTT. And that's the basis of why we talk about OTT as an end-to-end platform. Offering OTT from an end-to-end infrastructure perspective is not easy. There are barriers to get into this market. It could take up to 3 years to develop the software for an OTT platform so that it's proper end-to-end. There's a lot of money investment in terms of building a CDN, and of course there's also experience. Talking the language of the entertainment providers, understanding the internet, understanding the appliance business of broadcasters, and that experience plays to our strength as well. Let me finish off and give you a vision of where this is going. And at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about how we can have a single instance of that content sitting in the cloud. We don't have to have millions of copies in the cloud, right? This is a perspective where an OTT provider really has a single copy. Let's say it's a 4K master of that video, but in fact, actually, that video is chopped up in terms of a theatrical release, a director's cut, and extended cuts. But generally, there could be a single copy in that cloud. We have different language tracks that are part of that service. We have different subtitles. We have deleted scenes, behind the scenes, and trailers, structural, contextual metadata. And then we have thumbnails and poster art and so on. All of this formulate the product of what we're delivering to the end user. So imagine they've chosen the director's cut, they want to watch some deleted scenes, they have their language track that they want to include, whether it's dubbing or subtitled. Then that video is transcoded on the fly, is delivered to that device. The service knows the device that you have and sends you just the quality that you need for that device, and then you watch it on the multi-screen that you want. Okay? So we're not here yet to this level of sophistication, because we actually can't transcode a 4K master on the fly. But if we work off the notion that we can potentially have a single copy of this video and really have that level of efficiency and use computing power to do the rest of the work, then this could be a viable vision of an OTT service into the future. Now, the last thing I wanted is to show you where we see OTT going as a technology. OTT combines computing, combines communications, and combines entertainment. The communication services could be video conferencing that we talked about. It could be social networking. The entertainment services are, of course, the video, the music, and could also include gaming, for example. And the computing services are about productivity and storage. And all of these components really kind of formulate a future of where OTT can go, and looking at OTT not just as an entertainment platform, but as a computing, communications, and entertainment platform altogether.